Dear Steve, they meet each other 3 days before the world ends. Charlie's knifing open a can of chili and reclining against a boulder with a small fire of twigs and brush at her feet. Her legs are bare and dirty and brown. Water is scarce, and no one uses it for bathing anymore. Steve is hungry enough to risk talking to her. He creeps hesitantly out of a ditch, clutching a walking stick made out of a cactus rib, looking underfed and exhausted. Everybody looks that way these days. But he's the skinny, plaid shirt wearing sort of boy she might have liked when she was in high school, when she had time to like boys. So she lets him live. The first thing she says to him is, "Sit down." She cooks the chili on a hot rock. She splits it with him and even gives him the first bite. The stuff is lukewarm, probably expired, but when he puts the spoon in his mouth, his eyes sort of roll back in his head, and Charlie can see he's savoring away the beans and chunks of meat and cubes of tomato dissolve over his tongue. The first time Steve touches Charlie, his handy hurts wrapped in a cloth. There's a gash on her leg. They were sneaking into an abandoned diner and she got caught on the ragged edge of a broken window. The building is mostly concrete and inside it's cool and dark and the tables are upturned and the chairs are gone. Steve stops rooting around behind the counter when he notices Charlie crouching and grasping her thigh. He takes his only spare shirt out of his pack and yanks it in half. The threads snap one after another with little popping sounds. When she takes it from him, their fingers brush. Her skin is chapped and peeling. All of a sudden he feels hot again, burning around his neck and cheeks. He's glad of the darkness because she can't see the flesh. When Charlie tells him about her family, they're lying face up on a slab of rock. It sprouts out of the desert as if it has been growing there for thousands of years, and it's warm against their backs as they stare up at the stars. A strange thing is happening in the sky. It's the clearest it's ever been, maybe in the history of the world. They can see for light years. There are galaxies spinning so close they can reach up and rip them right out of the sky. The Milky Way drenches them with light so dense it's nearly slurpable. My little brother died, she says. I mean, not because of all this. She gestures to horizons, which are dark, as if there are clouds held there on the edges of their vision, though they both know those are dust storms. Maelstroms of rubble spinning in an ever-tightening spiral, with them and all that's left of the world at the center. It was a dirt bike crash, she adds. Then, I wasn't there. Sometimes I think the last thing he saw was clods of dirt. Steve doesn't say it, but when he thinks about the last thing he'll see, he hopes it's Charlie. They have their first kiss when they find a Volvo by the side of the road. It's dusty white and riddled with bullet holes, and most of the windows have been shot out, and there are corpses piled 20 feet away. But the thing runs, like it runs. They don't even stop to bow their heads or anything. They just look at each other, and all of a sudden they're flung into each other's arms, and they're grasping wildly, lips pressed and bellies close to knees, all knocking together. It's the last night. They're reclined in the seats, and the dirty desert wind is blowing through the broken windows. Their hands are clasped over the e-brake. Steve is curled on his side, looking over at Charlie. The corner of her mouth twitches. He reaches over and brushes the back of his hand against the curve of her cheek. She stares at him. She scratches the side of her face, and on her skin, her fingers leave red lines that fade slowly. Why didn't I meet you sooner? He says. Charlie considers, squinting her eyes. Steve was a database manager before the end began. He didn't wear a suit to work, and he spent a lot of time on Facebook. He didn't cook. There were puffs of dust collecting under the couch in the corners of his rooms. On Thursday nights, he played board games with his friends, and their laughter and the rattling sounds of 10-sided dice filled up the tiny apartment and spilled out gold and black windows. She says, so we wouldn't have time to hate each other? Now, all that's left is broken air conditioning and shattered windows and a fast car on a flat summer road, damp hair and sweat speckling the edges of their faces and their shirts sticking to the car seats, breathing hard and run for your life, here at the edge crumbling. Bits are breaking off and tumbling down. Huge waves of dust and debris billow through the flatlands. Earthborn clouds filled with thistles and weeds, with all the little animals surfing on skipping rocks and scraps of bark. Only a rough circle of blue sky remains, and in it the white sun is like a hot, pale eye. Steve is driving because he's always liked the rolling of the earth under him, and why stop now? Charlie's all legs and knees and elbows in the passenger seat with her hair whipping around her cheeks and ears. Steve puts his hand over her hand. She smiles, gravely. The noise is thunderous. Mountains crashing down and explosions of rock and tree and snow, mushroom clouds of wildflowers and gravel, birds rising, singing into the sky like flecks of ash. Steve stares at the road. The asphalt is fractured and mosaic, the dotted yellow hammered into tiny pieces. Charlie leans forward and opens the glove compartment. The drawer bangs open, and its contents spill into her waiting hands. A ballpoint pen, an old receipt for gas, a yellow envelope stuffed with papers from the DMV. Harold Jensen, she reads. She has to shout just to hear herself. 233 Alamo Drive, Santa Monica, California. They wonder who he was, why he was so far from home, where he thought he was going. If he was, like everybody else, trying to find someone before the end. The world is shrinking. Tsunamis of soil and stone rush inward, encircling the road, the car, the two of them. Charlie flicks the papers out the window one by one, whoop, 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 devoured greedily by the wind. Goodbye, Harold, Steve says. Charlie laughs. It's the last laughter the world will ever hear, and it's bitter and full of music. There's a hurricane of rubble heading towards him, and they're heading right back at it. He stops watching the road. He turns to her, touches a fingertip gently to her face. I would have liked to hate you, Steve says. There isn't much time left. The sky is disappearing. The sun is masked by dust. Behind them, swells of wreckage, piped from city sewers and statues missing their legs, and ancient stones dappled with ruins are catching up. The gap is closing. Charlie grabs his shoulder. She looks sad and angry and beautiful. I know, she says. And me too. Steve pushes his foot down on the gas pedal. They start to waver on the road. Rubble and ruin converge on them. In the clouds, they can see lampposts and rubber tires and thousands of scraps of paper like frantic white birds. They look at each other, and when the world closes in around them with bricks and boulders and shattered glass, they fly out through